Okay, on this Open Culture, we have an exciting guest, Don Debar, anti-war activist and journalist. He's going to talk to us about the failure of progressive media to accurately cover the conflicts that are going on in Syria and Libya and elsewhere. Hello, Don. How's it going?
Very well, Bob. How you doing?
Great. So, before we start on the topic, why don't you just tell my viewers a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the subject.
Well, I started out in public access television around this part of Westchester, as a matter of fact, about 30 something years ago. And the fact that I'm now sitting in my house doing this via Skype with you is extremely exciting for me. It's the first time I've been able to do that with public access.
It is really exciting. So,
So,
actually, you're my first guest on Skype too. So we're like kind of like learning this together.
so there you go. Um, I started out producing public access TV back in the late 70s. I produced a couple of shows that had some of the first public access audience in northern Westchester. Bug Out was one of them with Mark Rasco, and which was a pretty free-form late night, Friday night kind of thing. We had call-ins and discussions. You'd read various pieces from science fiction, politics, and things, and people would call in to chat about it. I did also a program called Backstage that featured music and different local political things. And from there, I um, got involved in trying to promote public access television around the country. I had a good friend who used to run the Public Access Center down in Tarrytown, who ended up on the national board of the Alliance for Community Media, and he had me doing different things for him over a period of time. And I ultimately ended up falling into radio station WBAI in New York City within the last 10 years or so. And 4 or 5 years ago, Bernard White, who was the program director at the time, Sharan Harper, who produced the morning show, and Errol Maitland, who was her senior producer, asked me to start doing the morning news for
I
them.
remember it
And
well.
so, yeah, so I was doing that for a couple of years. Then there was a management change at the Pacifica Foundation, which owns WBAI and four other radio stations around the country. And that management change purged, basically, the new management purged an awful lot of people based on their political inclinations and their support or their position on certain members of the senior staff. And with that purge, I went out. So I've been doing a bunch of independent projects. I've been uh, doing commentary on a lot of international media, Russia Today, Press TV, and others. And about a year and a month and a half ago, it was in early December of 2011, Bernard White and I started CPRmetro.org, which is an internet radio station. We use some video too. And I've been hosting a morning show from 6 to 9 in the mornings, Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, since December 5th of 2011.
Oh, I know. I love that show. I listen to it every morning, or it's Monday through Friday where it's live, and then you rebroadcast on the weekend, right?
That's right. Yeah, that, and we do other stuff too. We broadcast 24/7. So, and Bernard and I are both kind of chief cook and bottle wash. We have maybe at this point a dozen other producers that are producing content for us, and we also have content from Press TV, RT.com, Chinese media, Japanese media, others that we use to present news, commentary, and things that deal with what's going on in the world right now.
Which kind of leads us up to today's subject, because when I listen to you, like in the mornings, I hear viewpoints that I don't hear anywhere else, including BAI these days.
BAI and Pacifica in general, unfortunately, since the April Fool's Day coup of 2009, has, with a few exceptions, really gone downhill. Where there was before a very strong core of people who were producing news and community events and community issues for public consumption on the radio station. Those are the same people that, in the main, got purged, at least those that did so from a progressive or left point of view, or from a community point of view, particularly. Those are the folks that got purged. And so that programming went by the wayside. They picked up a couple of new programs since then, and they were going more for big names because the theory was that they needed to increase their ability to do fundraising from where it was at that point in time. The way to do that was with name recognition of the people that were on the air, and to try to cater to a more upscale listenership, because it's a listener-supported station. And that meant a lot of people of color, a lot of people from poor and working class communities that were on the air talking about the issues facing those communities got pushed aside altogether, or pushed into, like the evening and overnight slots, where there's very few listeners that are tuning in at that point, in favor of health guru types like Gary Null, music programming,
A lot of
just kind
music programming, which is I like the music put on, but it's like hour. It's now like Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday. It's like the whole morning blocks music.
Bernard White has been involved in radio for decades, and he was the program director there for a good long while. And he knows music programming very well, better perhaps than anybody I know. And he and I speak about the music programming at BAI periodically, and it's very difficult to figure out what they're going for, because they have a music that strip programming from 10 to noon every day during that used to be political programming, various types of political programming, and the music is not reaching for a consistent audience. Today it's this kind of music, tomorrow it's that kind of music, and people generally tune out when it's not something that they're tuning in for. You have almost microcasting across the rest of the dial with this people that want to hear this kind of music tune into FUV, that want to hear that type of music tune into Hot 97, whatever, and BAI, it's very hard to discern what they're going for. I strongly suspect from the numbers that have declined substantially in terms of fundraising since this group took over, and the fact that it takes them more days of on-air fundraising to raise less
It's like
money,
every other day they're
that
fundraising.
they're not connecting with the music programming and other things.
But also, aren't they taking a lot of programs from Al Jazeera now too?
Yeah.
Because I want to get into that too, like how say like some people think Al Jazeera is like this progressive network, and they're not.
Yeah. Al Jazeera is owned by the Qatari royal family. Qatar is a monarchy in the Middle East, and that is essentially a medieval monarchy. It's like a pre-Magna Carta type monarchy.
Yeah.
If you were going to draw an equivalent to the United Kingdom, for example. The word of the senior members of the royal family is law, literally. There are public executions. There is a great deal of repression of women. It's similar to Saudi Arabia in many ways in terms of being one of the most backward political and cultural constructs on the planet. They assembled, they have a tremendous amount of money from oil revenue. They assembled a rather good staff of journalists offering at the time an alternative in English language, because they were pitching to the UK and American markets, news service. And then all of a sudden there was Al Jazeera is owned by the Qatari royal family. The Qatari royal family sits on top of I guess you'd call it a state of Qatar. It's a medieval monarchy, pre-Magna Carta. There is no equivalent to the Magna Carta. In other words, the government that sits at the pleasure of the senior members of the royal family. Their word is law, the senior members of the royal family, including, you can be executed in public, for example, at the pleasure of one of these people. It's one of the most backwards, anti-democratic constructs, politically and culturally, on the planet, and would embarrass the medieval European states, who were, of course, no one to emulate in the first place. They established it and were able to gather an interesting collection of good journalists at the beginning, who were interested in setting up an alternative English language media to the nonsense that we get, CNN, Fox, whatever. And unfortunately, though, when it came time to start covering things that involve the interests of the Qatari royal family or the powers that they're allied with, the United States, UK, France, etc., for example, and in particular in the so-called Arab Spring uprisings, there came diktat from the royal family to these professional and interested in providing an alternative voice news producers that they were to cover it from a certain perspective. There were two instances of mass resignation from Al Jazeera by professional journalists over the tampering with the editorial control and the independence of the journalists there. And it is now, and has been more or less since around the time that BAI and Pacifica started carrying it at the beginning of last year, a mouthpiece for one of the most backward and repressive regimes on the planet. So for a progressive, quote unquote, free speech radio, quote unquote, radio network, as Pacifica styles itself, to use this as its primary news programming alongside Democracy Now! And Free Speech Radio News is a pretty pathetic state of affairs. And it's something that I addressed in some detail in the book that I co-authored that was edited by Cynthia
What's
McKinney
the name of
about
that
the
book?
coverage of the war in Libya.
You want to give a shout out of that name?
Say again, I'm sorry.
Shout out the name of the book so people can recognize it.
Oh yeah, I have one right here, as it turns out. The Illegal War on Libya.
Because this is going to lead us up to, too, like how there's been a covert support for Al-Qaeda in Libya and Syria and the failure, let's say, of Democracy Now! To cover that. So why don't we talk about some of those subjects?
I'm sorry. So in the book, we detailed using the Libya war as an example. The same thing is going on in Syria now, and we had also seen indications of this with Pacifica in particular, including Democracy Now! And Free Speech Radio News, during the French takeover of Côte d'Ivoire in Africa, in West Africa, and the aftermath of the Iranian presidential election 4 years ago, in 2009, where these institutions that, the news program, for example, Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez, covering the election in Iran, and without fact-checking, at least to the detail that I was able to do rather easily, more or less parroting the same factual basis of the discussion about protests and such that were taking place in Iran at the time, that was being broadcast on Fox News and MSNBC and CNN.
Now, why do you think that is? Do you think it's something to do with their funding and where they get it from? Or, I mean,
I don't want to speculate or impute the intent, but what I can do is deal with what can be examined. And so I examined in depth the performance of Democracy Now!, Free Speech Radio News, and the public affairs programming on Pacifica, particularly on BAI, dealing with, for example, Ian Masters' program. He's a producer from California that is now aired twice a week on WBAI, replacing local programming there, and also on Wake Up Call with Esther Armal, one particular incident. And the thing that's very troubling about all of it is, without even going to, why are they doing it, or, who's getting bought off, or is that what's happening? Is it just bad journalism or whatever? Is that what used to be a national radio network that had independent information assembled by independent producers that took a critical look at U.S. policy around the world is suddenly something quite different, and almost like one face of a niche marketing effort to sell war to the American public and to justify American actions to the outside world. I'll give you two instances of information, for example, that I communicated directly to Democracy Now!, to the executive producer of it, and to Amy Goodman as well. And that is, first, almost a month before the UN resolution authorizing a no-fly zone was approved. That was in mid-March of 2011. Um, Almost a month before that, on February 25th of 2011, there was an article in the English language daily in Pakistan. Now, remember, Pakistan was part of India, was an English colony up until the late 1940s. And so the English language daily there is very prestigious and is read by most of the elite there who speak English still as a residuary of the legacy of colonialism. That paper reported that U.S., U.K., and French troops had landed on 23 and 24 February in Benghazi, and that an Indian troop transport was en route to carry several thousand soldiers. Now, the U.S., U.K., and French troops were there at the time that the so-called protests that we were being told were taking place against the government in Libya were being assembled and were moving very quickly from street demonstrations involving a few dozen people to armed actions, and then ultimately the takeover of Benghazi by armed troops, and then the spread from Benghazi of armed militias that ultimately overran the country. Now, I thought that that was a very important piece of information to be communicated to an audience that was attempting to figure out what's going on in Libya. But instead, even though I sent it several times and confirmed that they got it, it was never reported at all on Democracy Now!, likewise Free Speech Radio News, and likewise, of course, Al Jazeera. Meanwhile, what did come out was that Al Jazeera was caught by RT, by Russia Today, rehearsing a group of people in Benghazi. This is after the armed group had taken over Benghazi, and they had a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 people assembled in a square somewhere, and they had them practicing chanting for when they went on the air for the news. That was caught on tape by Russian television and then sent, up on their service. So I forwarded that as well. In addition, and this I thought was the most important part, underlying the grant of authority to enforce a no-fly zone over Libya by the UN Security Council was a claim that the Libyan Air Force or the Libyan military was using air power against peaceful demonstrators, that they were strafing protesters, and that they were bombing their own people. And almost immediately as these claims were laid out with specific dates and locations the claims were made, the Russians provided satellite photographs showing that, in fact, there was no aerial activity in that area at that time, and that their review of the totality of it showed that there was no such operation ever going on. Now, I don't know why that wasn't considered by the UN Security Council, but I certainly thought it was newsworthy as that discussion was taking place here. And so I forwarded that as well, including the actual video statements by the senior member of the defense ministry in Russia, and then ultimately the president of Russia at the time, Medvedev. And yet none of that ever made air either, not even to hold up as a straw man and then say these reports are not credible or whatever. And I thought that that was the most germane thing there, because these alleged attacks ended up being the cause of war, inducing the war resolution, which wasn't even a war resolution, and ultimately the 8-month bombardment of that country, the killing of thousands of Libyans by an aerial assault that did in fact take place. And finally, for a good period of time in the spring and summer of 2011, Cynthia McKinney was on the ground in Tripoli.
Yeah, I got some of her reports to you.
Yeah, and she was holed up with a number of international independent journalists, Lizzie Phelan, for example, Mahdi Nezamuraya, a few others who were issuing reports, including video, certainly audio, describing exactly what was happening on the ground in Tripoli, which ran completely counter to what was being reported by all of the U.S. news media here, but particularly and most troubling by Democracy Now!, by Free Speech Radio News, and by Al Jazeera. And yet none of that ever made it. When Cynthia McKinney came back in early June with videotape of interviews with people in hospitals that had been, charred by the bombings, countering the narrative that there were surgical strikes that were only hitting military targets and all of that nonsense, and did a national tour, there was absolutely zero interest in coverage of this. Now, I'll contrast that to when Cynthia McKinney was on a boat that was captured, the Dignity, that was rammed by an Israeli ship on its way to Gaza.
I remember that too, yeah.
She ended up, Cynthia McKinney was on in the morning on CNN. That just got away from everybody and got wide publicity for at least a few hours in the morning. For some reason, the producers at Democracy Now! Were able to find me and get me to track down Cynthia to put them in touch in order to discuss that. And yet, when Cynthia was offering up both a lecture and a tour with a lecture around the country and a good 30 to 40-minute video of here's a college that was blown up during final exams in Tripoli by U.S. bombers. Here's an interview with a guy from the African Union that I was holed up with while we counted 11 hours worth of bombing, 89 strikes in Tripoli. Think about the fact that 12 years later almost, we're still at war over two planes hitting the World Trade Center. Just in one day, Tripoli, which has a population about the size of Manhattan, got hit 89 times by bombs a lot more destructive than an airliner, and that went on for 6 months, 8 months. And yet, evidence of the damage that was done to the human population and the civilian infrastructure there, which was readily available and offered, was not reported by Democracy Now!, Free Speech Radio News, or any of the other producers.
And this is also happening with the situation in Syria too, isn't it? They're not covering that also?
Well, the coverage in Syria is along the same lines as the coverage of Libya and the coverage of the Iranian election and the coverage of the situation that happened, the takeover of Côte d'Ivoire by the French. To me, the most telling thing about what happened in Côte d'Ivoire is that the president of Côte d'Ivoire was taken out of the presidential palace at gunpoint by French troops, the former colonial troops. And yet, the coverage that came from Democracy Now! In particular, which was what I was following at the time, was entirely different. The claim was that there was a presidential election that the insurgent candidate had defeated the incumbent president, and the incumbent president refused to go, and so the people were in rebellion. And in fact, there was something quite different going on. In terms of the election, it was almost identical to the 2000 election here. The Constitutional Court in Côte d'Ivoire had decreed that President Laurent Gbagbo had won the election, just like the Supreme Court here decreed that George Bush had won the election. And yet the United States and France and everyone started backing armed groups that were coming in from the north, stoking a rebellion. There were thousands and thousands of people who were killed. And it ended up, in any event, with the French having to remove the president from his presidential palace because the people were protecting him. And none of that was reported on Democracy Now! Their perspective on Middle Eastern issues and African issues, unfortunately, looks remarkably like white liberal, pseudo-left rather than, truly progressive.
Do you think that's because of laziness, or do you think they have some other agenda that they want to promote?
Again, it's difficult for me to impute what happens. I can only tell you what I witness, and what I've witnessed certainly has me asking questions like that, like why. I don't understand.
And then what are we to do, like on the left, if we want to hear legit progressive voices such as yours?
Well, we do what we're doing right now.
Because we're going to have to wrap up soon. It's been amazing having you on. So some final thoughts on the subject?
Say that again and slower, because
okay. We're running out of time here. So to wrap up, some final thoughts on the subject?
Yeah. One thing that we've done is to set up this internet radio station. We have...
and what's the address of that? Why don't you shout that address out?
Yes, www.cprmetro.org. CPR stands for Community Progressive Radio. We're based in the metropolitan New York area, so with cprmetro.org. We have producers all over the world already. One example, I have a guy in Managua, a journalist I speak with every Friday.
Oh yeah, that guy's great.
Yeah, 8:30, 9 o'clock, Tony Solo.
Yeah, I like the
Uh,
guy.
Eastern time in the morning. And we have Lister Lowell, who's also a producer at BAI, who does Burn Baby Burn. He gives us a rundown on what's going on in the Caribbean and in the local Caribbean communities in Brooklyn, etc. We have Obiami Azikiwe covering African affairs for us. We have the Party for Socialism and Liberation issues a weekly Liberation Radio report.
Yeah, I
We
bet that
have
was on
Black
yesterday,
Agenda
wasn't it?
Radio. Black Agenda Radio
Yeah,
report,
that's Glenn
Glenn
Ford, right?
Ford and Nell
Yeah.
Bailey every week, and a whole host of producers and documentaries and other things from Press TV, RT, Chinese Daily News, NHK, all kinds of different sources around the world.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom, for coming on.
Thank you too, Bob. Take care of
Awesome.
yourself. Keep up the good work.